welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, the personal, professional, and career development podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Dave Peltz, and along with me is my esteemed colleague, as always, my super sidekick, Dr. Joe Hamlett. How you doing this morning, Dr. Joe?
I'm doing pretty good. You already got you off on a good start. So
um, for those of you, we'd like to welcome you back. For our viewers and listeners, welcome back to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. If you're new to the podcast, buckle up. Hopefully, this is going to be a good one. We know it will be. We've got a wonderful guest speaker with us this morning, Jeffrey Wotherspoon. How are you doing today, Jeffrey?
Hey Dave. Hey Dave and Joe. I'm doing very well, thank you, and glad to be on.
Awesome,
all right.
awesome. So before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for a couple minutes, and then I'll introduce the topic, and we'll get running from there.
No problem. I guess I'll just do the introduction, both professional and personal, so the viewers and listeners can get to know me a little. So professionally, I'm a coach. I do some executive coaching, and that's essentially working with senior leaders on organizational problems. I do some leadership coaching, and that's really focused on, again, working with leaders, but on leadership capabilities. So the coaching will typically start with a 360 report, and then those are the elements we'll work on, and then it will end with another 360 report. I also do some life coaching, and that's with young men in prisons in London and the southeast of England. And I've been doing that for about 11 years. And finally, I'm an organization, relationship, and systems coach, or
Hmm.
in short, ORS. And everything I just described to you is more or less coaching one to one. And the ORSC enables me to do the same thing with two or more people, relationship systems. So I do that with small teams or even small organizations. By myself, I'm probably comfortable holding up to 40, 50 people going through that process.
Wow.
So that's me as a coach. When I'm not a coach, I'm a trainer, facilitator, and increasingly I'm a keynote speaker. So my week's pretty busy, and Monday to Friday, I'm doing any one of those things. Um, and I guess finally, the other thing I'll say, and this is another string to my bow, I'm a high risk conflict resolution specialist, and
Hmm.
I trained with an organization that was based in London who worked with the Met Police to mediate high risk conflicts. So, we have a knife crime challenge here, and sometimes that results in a murder, and then the police would have intelligence of retaliation, and then they would send in the high risk mediators to mediate those situations. So of course another crime isn't committed. So again, that's who I trained with. I've done some high risk conflict resolution in my time, and now it's a lot lower risk, really sort of mediating things things within the workplace. So that's me professionally. Personally, I'm originally a Londoner, but I now live in a place called the Garden of England. And I've done work with quite a few Americans actually, especially in the last couple of years. And when I say does anyone know where the garden is, there's always tumbleweed. So for your listeners, that's a place called Kent in England. So that's where I live now. I've been here for almost 7 years, and I'm a girl dad as well. So I've got two girls. One's 2.5, the other's 10 months, and I'm married. Again, March will be 7 years since I got
Wow.
married. So that's who I am.
Wow,
Wow.
excellent. Wow, that we still are learning more about you as we talk.
Wow.
Love that, love that.
Not busy at all.
Yeah, yeah. You're not busy at
There
all.
you
That's
go.
that's one of the takeaways, right? All right. So
There you go.
today's topic is use your agency, and we had talked
Mm.
about that offline for quite a bit a couple of weeks back, and found it absolutely fascinating. So why don't you introduce us on use your agency?
Yeah, and from what I remember, I feel like that topic almost came up organically as we did our introductions, and I remember
Right.
hearing both of your introductions, right, and being so impressed with both of your stories and what both of you have been able to achieve, and that just kind of led slash inspired me to share a bit about my journey, but not at all comparing it to yours, because I actually think your both your journeys are fascinating. Um, but use your agency is probably, in a sentence, something that's been huge in my own personal journey and career. And in my introduction, I shared really what I do day to day now. If I shared a full sort of bio, I would have also said I'm a certified and accredited career coach because I am. And I don't do the career coaching as much anymore because I do the other types of coaching. Um, but I've worked with over 500 people specifically on the areas of career. And again, use your agency is something that I think is of utmost importance in people really getting ahead in life. So for me, my background, I grew up in inner city London, which has some similarities and some differences to any inner city in the US. And growing up in that environment meant is I was around a lot of negativity, but I also didn't see I guess positive role models. And what I could see were cycles, especially around men, and particularly black men, and their cycles of life. Let's say from the streets to gangs to prison to death or to just being a nobody. And this was a short cycle. This was from the ages of 13 to 25, let's
Mhm.
say. And many of us lacked father figures or positive role models at home. And how I interpreted that then is this is just what life is like for people like me. Nobody told me that story, but you have to make sense of the world the best you can. And my way of making sense of the world was trying to understand how I found myself in this situation, how others have found themselves in other situations, and me seeing where life goes for people. And I also remember being very young and my mum saying, Jeffrey, be a doctor or a lawyer. And obviously, as a youngster, I said, yes, mum. But I knew in my heart of hearts, I was not going to be a doctor or lawyer. And primary reasons, the doctors were Asian and the lawyers were white. And I
Mm.
thought, these people don't look like me, but the people who look like me are on the streets or are in the post office or the supermarkets, etc. So that's sort of how I saw my life growing up. And therefore, I had a choice to go into that or a choice to try and do it differently. However, try and do it differently really means getting into sports, music, or the streets. So again, my options were limited. Sadly, I didn't consider myself creative or musical, so that was an option. I got into a little bit of trouble, so the sports came down, and therefore I had one option left. And I was headed down that road. It wasn't a pretty road. I got myself in trouble, and um, I just thought, this is it. In some ways, life is doomed, right? And then one of the things I shared with you both, at the time where I believed life was doomed, I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna give up. I'm just gonna resign myself to this. I'm probably gonna end up in prison. Let's just see how this goes. And unfortunately, I had what I say was a number of what I call divine interventions, which then eventually led me to find faith, specifically to find Christ. And that opened my eyes in a new way. And then just for the first time in my life, I remember thinking, I can actually do something different in life. And it was just a feeling and a belief, and I could see it. And then the question is, what did I want to do? And I believed at that moment I could do anything I wanted. But then I remembered growing up with so many people, so many of my friends, all my peers being just like me. And I thought everyone sees the world I do. We've never had this conversation, but I know me and all my friends and all our peers, we see the world in the same way. So let me tell them it can be different. So that's how my new journey set off. And where the Use Your Agency came in is because along that journey, I began to realize that that we have agency. That you know, i- if you believe something, you genuinely can achieve it. And if you can, most things in life are skills, and like all skills, the more you do it, the better you can become at it. You may not be the best, but you can be better. So this is really what's led me on my journey. And as I say, even the work in prisons, and I've just really told you why I do the work in prisons. I've kind of given you the context to it. And when I go to the prisons, I go knowing I'm coming from their environments. I go knowing that actually many of them have had more difficult circumstances than I have. So I go with full empathy. I go with no judgment, but I also go with challenge as well. And coaching's beautiful because it's a self-directed way of learning. So I essentially ask the young men in prisons questions in a way that they can begin to perceive and see their world differently and listen to their own voice. Because coaching isn't, I'm going to tell you what to do or I know the way, etc., etc. I'm also not going to go to prison and say to the people, you shouldn't do this because I think it's obvious they know they shouldn't have done it, right? So I think that's a redundant statement. But I can go to prisons, we can have dialogue, I can ask them questions, they can begin to see things another way for themselves, then they tell themselves they shouldn't do it. Because one of the things I've noticed about that cohort of people is they tend not to listen to authority anyway, and they haven't from maybe the home, from school, from society, from the community. But there's one person that they do listen to, and that's their own voice. So when their own voice is telling them how to behave and how things can be different, they begin to see it for themselves. And essentially, what they begin to have is agency. They begin to have agency and take responsibility for the choices they're making despite the negative circumstances. But the difference is they've been able to see a way out. And that's what's so key when you're younger. Life really is seeing is believing. That's why certain people grow up with role models and they just naturally take a path in life because they see it. Other people who have that absence, they have no reference point. So they follow what they see. And there are literally young children now growing up to a life of gangsterism, growing up to a life of crime because it's what they see, it's just how they're going to be initiated into that life. And for many of them, they'll have no option out. But hopefully everyone will get to a particular age where they can really begin to process themselves and then begin to start using their agency to change their life. So that's what it means to me.
Wow, that is super powerful, Jeffrey. I myself worked at a state corrections facility for 5.5 years,
Mm,
and I understand some of the things that you're talking about, um, and I get it. And the fact that you were able to recognize where you were and you actually made the conscious choice to change your path is so powerful. That message is so powerful. Yeah, Joe, what are your thoughts?
Well, I go back to, when he talked about not having those role models, not having seen people, when your mother told you, "Hey, be a doctor or a lawyer," but you not seeing that's very hard to do, to be able to imagine that you could be that when you don't see those things. And that
mhm,
was very similar to me. My dad was there, he was present, he worked, but that's what I saw, a hard
mhm,
worker. And so that was the expectation I had for myself, that I was just going to go do that. So I wasn't a kid that got in trouble and all those types of things, but I still lacked direction on what I wanted to do with my life, where I wanted to go. So that was for me, again, not knowing, who I could be, where I could end up, because I just didn't have enough examples in front of me, enough people that I could, look at and say, hey, that could be me one day. So that's why I
mm,
always imagine, some of my friends, those people around me who didn't have a presence of a dad there, or some father figure, or some male role model. And again, me not being going down that path, I can see how easy that could be. Because even though I had both parents in the house, I had, those things I needed to that degree, but I didn't have those things that could help me see beyond what path I was going to take. So I think, as Dave said, that's very powerful for a young person trying to figure out who they're going to be or what they could be, and just, resolving to the fact that, okay, that's all I'm going to be, or that's who I'm going to be. And
mm,
so for me, that's, again, I can relate to that, not at the same level, but I can understand that as well.
mm. Yeah. And, as I was just listening to you speak, it just really made me think so much about um, even America and our country, and what it's like to grow up in the inner city, or being black, and there are many societal issues out there, right, that people feel a lot about. We know racism exists. The level to which it exists, I think, is where the complications and the conflict comes in, right?
mm,
And even without going down that path of dialogue, it's understanding that despite racism existing, it still doesn't limit us, right?
right,
I mean, it can be a hindrance, but it's not a determining factor.
right. Yeah,
And this is why the use your agency has become so important for me personally, because growing up how I grew up, in the environments I grew up, I remember, without exaggerating, one thing from sociology very, very powerfully. And this is the one thing from sociology I went home and shared with my mum. And I was in college when I did sociology. And we were learning about class. And then the teacher said, those who are working class tend to grow up working class. Those who grew up working class tend to just repeat that cycle. And those who are middle class tend to stay middle class. And I understand what he was saying now. And that's just a cycle, right? But that's not how I interpreted it. I went home and I said to my mom, see, mom, like it's in the book. I learned it in class. We're working class. This is my life. You keep telling me do all these things. It's not gonna work, mom. Like
yeah,
I knew it wasn't gonna work because I see it around me, and you keep telling me I can break out. But there's sociologists that, we're studying this stuff. And my mom still wasn't listening to me, and there was me thinking, this woman doesn't know what she's talking about. But now I understand the power of use your agency, because all of those things still exist, but they are, if anything, contributing factors to limitations. They are not determining factors. And there's a quote by Alice Walker which says something like the most common way people give up their powers by believing they don't have any.
mm,
And what I've come to realize, particularly if we're in the West, because look, I've traveled the world, right? And when I travel the world, I'm so aware of the differences, and I'm so aware of actually where you're born in terms of country sometimes can determine your life outcome. And when I hear the stories of developing countries and why people go into particular lines of work, etc., I'm like, this is tough for people. But I believe if you're in the West and there's 100 stories around us all the time, that actually, if you actually do see your power, if you put in the hard work, meritocracy can help, it can work, it can work. This is why both of our lands have immigration problems, right? Because there are people in other parts of the world, they say, look, with the best will in the world, I don't think I'm going to make it. But I've heard that there's a place called the United States. I've heard that there's a place called England. And and I know people. I know people who came from where I came from, and now they have a car,
mm,
you know. Now they come back here on holiday. And again, it's that thing, seeing is believing. So this is my main message, and it doesn't take away any of the challenges that society brings, but it's really about using your agency. And my own story about agency, and this is why I believe it so passionately, is when I did have my own mindset before I came to Christ and saw the light, and I still was very limited in my thinking. I remember seeing a bus go past. Our bus is transport, right?
mhm,
And it said 24K for a bus driver. And I remember when I saw that, I thought, yes, I've plucked it. I've got my secret in life. I'm going to get my driver's license and become a bus driver. If I
mm,
do that, I'll get 24K. That's a lot more than I think. I mean, I've grown up in a house. We don't get 24K.
mm,
So if I get 24K, that's going to change my life right there and then. Because around that time as well, the average for teachers was 25K. So I was like, I'm going to be getting 1K less than the teacher. And then because of the life I was living, I thought if I do a little side hustle, I don't go in too much, but I just do a little, and I get an extra 15, 16K, I could be on 40K per annum. And that time of thinking, I thought I would be rich. I thought if I got 40K, my life would be different, and then at the age, I think must have been about 20 years old, maybe a little younger. My aspirations was to be a bus driver, and that was, I was happy with that. And there's nothing wrong with being a bus driver. I'm not sure if it's anyone's aspirations, like, if you speak to a young child who's 5 or 6 years old and you say, what do you want to be? They may say a bus driver, right? Because that seems like a fun job. You don't really speak to an 18, 19, or 20-year-old and they're like, yeah, I aspire to be a bus driver. But that's kind of how deep and entrenched my mind was. And for me, agency is the thing that brought me out. And sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but let me say this because it came up. It
No,
came up
it's
because we
fine.
spoke in December, and in December, a professional colleague said they wanted to interview me for something. Well, actually, I think I met them in November. We were at a place in November, and they said, in December, can I interview you? So we had the interview. And when they approached me in November, they said to me, um, they gave me the context of what they want to do and said, the reason I want to interview you, Jeffrey, is because 3 years ago, I I saw us around like doing similar things professionally. 3 years ago, I would have said we were on par, and we were actually working for some of the same organizations. We're still self-employed, but we had contracts for at least we had contracts for three of the same organizations, right? So I saw what he was saying, but then he said, in this 3 years, and I see even on LinkedIn, now you seem to be flying all over the world with this exec team, etc., etc. And he's like, that's a rapid growth, Jeffrey. And I remember saying to him, that, yeah, thank you. That's true. Yeah, I didn't actually think about how rapid things have gotten. And then I came home and I was thinking of it and I thought, wow, what if that same gentleman said 4 years ago? Because 4 years ago, I remember speaking to him, trying to get advice. 4 years ago, he was doing what I wanted to do. In some ways, 4 years ago, he was a role model to me. And I thought, that's so interesting. And it just goes to show, 4 years ago, I wanted to be doing what he was doing. A year later, we were doing it. 3 years ago, he acknowledges that there's a significant gap. And I thought, what's the difference? And one of the things he said to me is, I see you, Jeffrey, as someone who takes opportunities. And he said, and that's not something I see in myself. So part of the interview is to find out what your mindset is, what your process is for taking on these opportunities, and what can I learn from that? And I said, that's exactly it. That's exactly what the difference has been. Because I have a goal and a vision of where I want to go. And life has a way of bringing things up, bringing things my way. And one of the things that I've made a decision many years ago to do was to never let fear get in the way, you
Mm.
know? And because I'm scared of failure, I don't fail.
Right,
Does that
right.
make sense? Right. So if someone comes to me, they say, can you do this? And if it aligns to the vision, I say, yes, I can. Then I literally worry about it later. Right.
Right.
But I'm like, when I've got this opportunity and all this responsibility, I can't fail. So I have to make it come through. And it's been a very stressful career time in that sense, because I think I work extremely hard. But will I change it? Not at all.
Mm.
And, you know, who I am now and what I do and the mindset and the knowledge I've got, it's I mean, I blow myself away and I'm the one living that life, right? But it all came through hard work, through skill, through learning. And it's again, it's saying yes, using your agency, taking responsibility. And one of the things I said, I'll try my best never to let anyone determine how I behave.
Mm.
I understand people can influence the way I behave, but I always want to, as much as possible, control how I behave because I believe that's what makes me a powerful person. And yeah, this is what I try to share with other young men who we had a similar upbringing.
Yeah,
Wow.
that is so powerful, Jeffrey. Wow. I mean, I'm at a loss for words just listening to you. I mean, your story is I I wish I could put it in a bottle and drink it, and then, market it so other people could drink it because that's how powerful your message is. And the whole agency piece I totally get. Being aware of who you are, what you want to be, and that you don't, and what one of my friends told me many years ago, break the cycle. Break the cycle, just stop doing it. Don't do it. Just stop doing it. Break the cycle and do what you need to do instead of what you think you need to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you said a lot of things. I can't even reflect on everything that you said just because it was so much information. But a couple of things that I keyed on was one, don't let and you said this maybe in previous speaking, but you said something about not letting people take your power away. I
Mm-hmm.
got that
Mm,
because I've encountered that as well. The other one was the piece about um, your values, your mission, where you're trying to go, but accepting those opportunities that align with that.
mhm.
Because I'm of the opinion or thought that I accept all those opinions, but you're right. You have to be careful with that because it may not align with what you're trying to accomplish or the things you're trying to do. So those two things really stand out to me. Just because again, knowing who you are, knowing where you want to go is great. But if you deviate from that plan or that program by accepting things that don't align with that, then you're just spinning your wheels. You're not really making progress or moving forward. So I really like that you point that out. Accept opportunities, but make sure that they're aligned with what you want to achieve, or where you want to good as well.
Yeah.
We've got about 3 minutes left. What are some of the things that you want to leave our audience with, Jeffrey?
I think I may have already said it, you know, and it's that quote about power. The most common way people give up their power is by believing they don't have any. Um, and I think one of the things that makes people equal is we've all got the power to choose. And a simple kind of mantra I've used in my life, is just do the right thing. Just do the right thing. Sometimes when I don't know what to do, I do the right thing. And I believe that's what's got me ahead personally and in my career. I think one of the things that helps me in my career is what you see is what you get, so people know what to expect, and there's that authenticity. And it's taken a while for me to develop it, or not to develop it, but to recognize it. But actually, so many people are trying to be somebody else. And I tried to be somebody else, particularly as a coach, as an exec and leadership coach, right? I had imposter syndrome. And I was getting the opportunities and not feeling like I belonged, and feeling like I was like this opportunity was somehow a mistake, right? So I was trying to act as someone else. And the truth is, we can't really be anyone else that well. But a couple of years ago, I got an insight that I bring value. And with my old head and mindset, that was huge for me because I thought I had no value, right? But I thought to myself, hold on, these opportunities are really coming to me for a reason. So I am bringing value. So don't try and be someone you're not, Jeffrey. Just understand that, look, there's some places you go, they may not want you, or they may not like you, etc. That's fine. You still bring value. Like, look at your record, look behind you. You've you've achieved things. So just go where you're celebrated, right? So I was like, yeah, let me not try and be someone else. Let me be myself. And I would say my career was going diagonally. And when I had that insight, it stopped vertical.
Mm.
My career went vertical. And I thought, wow, look at that. And again, one of the insights I've got is other people are trying to figure it out too. And as they're trying to figure out, they're trying to be someone else. But when I work with leaders now, I say to them, I use my story. I don't tell them my story, but I use my insight from my story. And I say, but the thing that makes you unique as a leader is
Yeah.
you and all your experience. And look, you're already in the position as a leader. So what are your values? What's your authenticity? What can you stand for? All of these things that I've probably heard before, but sometimes when you hear things without the experience or the context, it doesn't line, it doesn't click the same. And now I know who I am. I know what I stand for. So I'll go places and I'll be that. And if they don't want it, because I'm now confident in who I am, I don't personalize it. I just say, look, they don't want it, right? There's different places. But at the same time, I'm yet to venture that place where people haven't wanted it. So so the takeaway for your audience, in addition to using their agency, understanding that they have power, and whatever they say about working smart, that's very important, but working hard, you can never go without. I think it's so important to work hard. Be yourself. Be yourself. And yourself is you and all of your experience. It's that principle of using what you have and focusing on what you have as opposed to trying to focus on what you don't. Yeah.
Wow,
Wow.
Jeffrey, we've loved having you on this podcast. Well, you have such a powerful insight and powerful story to share, and I'm just so happy we connected and we're able to bring you onto the podcast because it's obvious that you are having a huge impact on people's lives, and that's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Joe,
Thank you.
final thoughts?
Again, thanks for being on the podcast. You again just continue to validate some of the things that me and Dave have talked about, on the podcast. So it's great to hear another perspective, someone who's doing amazing things, to also share some of these same things. So I want to just echo one of the last things you said about being yourself, being authentically
Mm,
you. I'll go back again to my mom who passed away years ago, who at the end of her life, she had dementia, and so every time I
okay.
went to see her, she just
Mm,
kept telling me, "Be true to yourself. Be true to
wow.
yourself." And it was like she was telling me that the first time because she just couldn't
Yeah.
remember. But so I don't know how many times I heard her say that with that last year she was around, but it really did stick with me. It really did, just put a light on that for me, just to be who you are. And like you said, all your experiences, everything you've done,
Mm,
that's who you are. Don't take things away from who you are. Don't strip those things away to fit someone else's idea of who you should be. So I really love that you ended with that, because again, that has been my goal, especially these last few years, the last 10 years. It's just to be who I am, all
love
of
that.
who I am. And so
Love
thanks for
that.
that last comment. Again, great having you on the podcast. I could have kept just sat here and listened to you for hours. I mean, it was really powerful, like Dave said, the content that you just shared with us. So thanks again.
Thank you, Joe. And just to echo what Joe said, wow, your story is so inspiring. And I hope whoever listens to this podcast, please share it with people because it's going to make a difference in someone's life. It really is. So with that, we'd like to thank you for joining us on another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, your personal, professional, and career development podcast. Um, if you like this episode, like and subscribe, share, thumbs up, give us some questions, some feedback. We love the conversation that comes from our podcast. And with that, we want you to continue being your not so ordinary you.
See you later.